Hello, hello, and good evening. Today we have our special meetup, our special end of the year meetup. And for this, I have invited no one less than Mr. NG News, Rainer Hahnekamp. Hi, Rainer.
Hello, Manfred, and hello to everyone watching and listening. Hi.
So, before we start, what was the biggest surprise for you this year, the best feature you have seen?
For me personally, the best feature I would say was not signal forms, although they're really great, but it was really the decision for retest in Angular 21. And I also have an underdog favorite, which is not a feature, but for me, it was the Angular documentation. Just to hear all the things from the history, from the past, the reasons of the switch from AngularJS to Angular, why then it took a little bit longer that Angular kind of kept up with all its features. Just hearing all that stuff just gives you a completely different perspective on the Angular framework as a whole. So that was something.
Awesome. And you have prepared a lot of more news from this year. But
Yes.
before we look into them, we need to look a bit into our sponsors, because all of this would not be possible without having those great sponsors. So let me share my screen. You should now see the first sponsor, which is
Yes.
Bearing Point, a long-term partner. We are working together with them for years, for about 10 years now. And they are always happy to support us on site, but also online. The next sponsor is Good New, also a long-term partner. I know the founders or some of the founders for more than 10 years. And then they started this company, and since then we are also working together with them quite a lot. We have ArenaDeck, a huge company with a huge audition platform in the web. Check it out. And then there are those guys, Angular architects. They are said that they are doing quite a lot of nice workshops. And talking about workshops, there is this Angular architecture workshop with all those topics here: reactive architectures, maintainable architectures. And meanwhile, we have another English and German version online. So get your tickets. And last but not least, if you are a bit sorry that you are not on the sponsors list, then reach out to me. I know a little tiny trick to get you on the list of the sponsors. Just drop me an email and I will tell you this little tiny trick. Okay, cool. So that's it from this part. And I would say now let's move over to the news of 2025.
Yes, exactly. All right. Yeah. Then I would say the way how we both, Manfred and myself, have imagined it, that we will go through a few highlights of this year. I will kind of give an icebreaker per each topic, and then we just have a nice conversation with each other.
Mhm.
Before I do this, maybe a quick introduction to NG News itself. This talk in my current role, or in the role for this talk, I'm actually representing here NG News. So that's also why the slides are a little bit different. But what is NG News? We are an Angular newsletter with the goal to publish at least, not at least, but to publish once per week. We are available on different platforms. So there is the video edition, which you can watch at YouTube, TikTok, and also Instagram. And then we also have a written version, where I hear the most channels is they have two, Medium and then also LinkedIn. There are also, and I want to highlight this a little bit, there are some certain rules, principles of the things which come into NG News, because I'm very often asked about it. How do I do the selection? How do we do the selection? How does this work? Here are just a few principles. First one is it needs to be objective. So it's really like a very neutral newsletter. We don't want to bring emotions into it or something else. It needs to be like just basic information, and that's it. It's always about advanced content. So it's not really like beginner things or something. No self-promotion is allowed. So if someone speaks at NG News, then you can't just promote your own content. So For example, I can't just say I've written an article and that's it. It always has to be someone else. And each content that we are providing needs to be available for free. That could be, it is allowed if someone says, okay, there are now certain recordings of a conference and you have to subscribe with your email and then you get access to it. That kind of counts. But if someone kind of sells content and you have to pay for it, then these are things which cannot come up on NG News. Just that people know it. There is an NG News team. I'm not alone. The active team, so to say, we also had Sono Kapoor. But the current active team for the international part is Michael Small and myself. Michael Small in the background is always kind of preparing, collecting information, which is then kind of filtered out at the end of the week. Not everything makes it into the final recording. We also have a Brazil edition of NG News. And for a few weeks, since a few weeks, we also have a Spanish version, which increased the team hugely. And the way how it works with the Spanish group, I'm very happy about it. They are, as far as I know, all GDs. They are making NG News in Spanish. And the way how they do it is that they have some kind of a rotation table. So each week, another one of them is doing the recording. So in the end, the way how it works, the international one, the international NG News, that's the basis. I'll send it to them. They're going to translate it into their language. I'll send it back to me. Then I do all the post-production for them. And then this video is then, in this case, it's published in the Spanish language. Works very well. And as I said, I'm quite happy that we are already now quite a huge team. Good. There are also some future plans. We want at some point in time come up with our own website. We have one central point where we also allow other people to submit their own contents, some own features, blogs, videos, and so on and so forth. Maybe even further languages. There might be a new language coming up next year. We will see. So that's it for NG News. And as I said, we would not go through the different topics that we had in a chronological order. And that's why we start with Angular version 19 that we had. And here the highlight, I would say, with the versions 19.2 especially, was the work on was the release of the HTTP resource. There was also in the meantime, so before 19.2 already, support for streaming, which was built in the RX resource and the normal resource, which was not released in 2025, but already in 2024. And which I think what most of us don't remember even more, this is the resource in 19 had this outdated behavior. So there was this nice feature that no error was thrown, which we have now. Also the it was called request and not parameters. And when we accessed the status, those were enums. And in version 20, those then were kind of changed to union types, just normal string types. So this is what I would say, how the year started with an extension of the resource itself. Manfred, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite parts of the new features because it really bridges a gap. It allows us to fetch HTTP stuff during the directive data flow directly within our reactive graph. And another funny story is this API was designed in the Austrian Alps. And here's the question.
Yeah.
So last December, we had this meetup in Graz where Mathieu Riegler was there and Alex Rickerbo from the Angular team. And then after the meetup, we went by train up to Vienna for another mini conference. And there, within the train, Mathieu and Alex started thinking about the HTTP resource, designing it, doing some, let's say, pseudocode to try out what works, what does not work. So somehow funny. And I was sitting directly next to them. So this was somehow in retrospective a nice moment.
I was sitting behind them, so I just heard the story afterwards.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
HTTP resource there because I had to work on something else. But I was not aware that also the design and all that stuff happened in the train.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're good that we have such a good internet connection in Austria. So
Yeah.
it pays off. Nice. Right. What else did we have? Then there was the Angular documentary. And as I said in the beginning, for me, this is this underdog highlight, which just explained the way how Angular has evolved. And for me, it just really brought a different perspective on the framework itself. Just the main points. What was really surprising for me, when there was the switch from AngularJS to Angular, for me, I never really understood why they were introducing that many breaking changes, or why they forced us to rewrite the application. You just have not the best feeling if you hear that. But in this documentary, they really explained the background story behind it. And they were saying, look, it was like this. AngularJS, the project was written in JavaScript. It was the star of the frameworks at that time. But the problem was always that there was not really a funding of Google itself, because Google did not use the framework for its own products. Then there was some interest from Google. As far as I know, it was Google Ads, so the ads department. And they said, we want to use AngularJS, but there are some requirements. We can only use it if you're using a static type programming language, which forced the Angular team to rewrite the framework in that regard, so that it fulfills the requirements of their internal departments and to get funded. So this was a must-have. There is nothing which could be done differently. Of course, if they could have always said, no, we don't want to do it. But then you just have to risk that no one at Google is using you, which means you can get canceled and you're running out of money, which is not what we want. The strange thing, or the interesting thing, is that with this rewrite, there was also a deadline included. And at some point in time, obviously, when the deadline arrived, they had to publish it. And at that time, they already knew that this is not really finished, and that it requires another refactoring or another rewrite. And this is what was then more or less all these stalling years, where they said, we are going to introduce a new renderer, so this was this Ivy project, where they promised us, if once this is done, once Ivy is there, we can produce a lot of new features in a much, much faster pace than we can currently do. But still, the reason why they had to do this refactoring, at least to the documentary, was because this rewrite had a deadline where they had to finish, and then they knew we have to again do another incremental refactoring, but this time not by forcing the end user to rewrite their own applications, but we will do it under the hood. Again, this was the Ivy framework, and nowadays, looking back, we really see that this has paid off, this refactoring, because nowadays many people, or maybe even the same people, which have been complaining in the past that now no new features are coming out in Angular. Now the majority is saying, no, it's just too fast. We are getting too many features with each release. And this documentary showed this really well. Yeah. Manfred, from your side?
No, not really something to add here.
Okay,
really.
Okay, good. Then we move on. Angular strategy. This was one of the most watched episodes. That's why I thought we have to include it here. At that time, Minko Getchev was still the product lead. And they were talking about the future of signal components. So as some of you might know, when Angular Signals came out in version 16, the original plan was to release signal components, so a new component type with Angular 17 already, which didn't happen, obviously. And the promise of signal components were always that they are providing a much, much faster change detection and just a more performant application. Minko was asking this Q&A, what's now the future of signal components? When can we expect them? And he said, at the moment, which is really interesting, they don't really see anything which would be an obstacle for a performant Angular application. They say, whenever someone complains, they say, did you try out signals? Did you try out then you defer? Did you use server-side rendering for initial loading performance? And all these companies who are complaining, once they use all the modern tools that Angular now provides, the performance issues are just gone, which means that they don't really prioritize signal components at the moment, because they say there is at the moment not so much need for this additional performance gain that you can get. But if there is a requirement, then of course they can always upgrade. They already now have a plan what needs to be done. Also, sunsetting Angular animations was kind of spoiled already in February. And Minko also mentioned that they want to close the gap to Vite, to the Vite ecosystem, which was already some indication that maybe Vitest as the new testing framework might become a serious player.
I think in general, a lot of good decisions, because meanwhile CSS has evolved, and so we can really go with CSS animations. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And also when it comes to signal components, I guess this is a topic that brings a lot of emotions, because suddenly we have another type of components, and this type is different. So perhaps it's really a good idea to postpone this endeavor until we have a good reason for introducing it, something like a new authoring format, which also brings a lot of emotions. But then we have the emotions at once, and hopefully we see why this hopefully additional feature makes sense. So let's see where this is going.
Great. Good. Next thing, maybe short, maybe it doesn't affect Angular as it is, but maybe indirectly in the future. But then also at some point in time, TypeScript announced that they want to re-implement TypeScript in Go, which means, of course, TypeScript will be executed much faster. They are talking about 10 times faster. And since in its core, the Angular framework, the Angular compiler is based on the TypeScript compiler, we, of course, will also benefit from it. But when we are talking about TypeScript, and that's why I think it's so important, we also have to understand that TypeScript is also used in the IDE. So there is the language server there, which just helps us when we are writing code. And that also depends on TypeScript, which means also those things like the tool that just depends the complete ecosystem of TypeScript, that also gets this performance boost immediately. At the moment, of course, the work is still ongoing, but this was announced also very early in this year.
Important topic. I think no one will complain about faster builds, obviously. Perhaps one thought here, having TypeScript re-implemented with a native language like Go is just one side of the coin. We also will need a native implementation of the Angular compiler. I did some experiments when ES Build came out, and there I found out that if we have a native compiler and the Angular compiler is not native, it will really slow down the entire process. So to really get a lot of gain out of this, we need both sides of this coin. And so I'm really looking forward to where the Angular team is going with this approach here.
Yeah. I think for Angular, it will be even more challenging because they have their own TypeScript implementation inside of Google. The question is what happens to that one. They also do it in Go or not, and what happens if now the public one is in Go and the internal one is not. So I think it will take a little bit longer time until we can get the benefits out of it, but it's definitely a good step forward.
Yeah. Especially in the enterprise environments where we are active, we have quite often the issue that the build times take too long, that it takes too long to get feedback from the compiler, from the build system. So I think this is more than welcome.
Great. Yeah, then there was the other one. This episode, as far as I know, had the most views, not just on YouTube, but also on LinkedIn even. This was Selectorless. This was like a rocket. It came and then it disappeared after some time. Selectorless means that there were some plans announced where Angular is saying, look, we think that double imports are not necessary. Whenever you want to use a subcomponent in your existing component, then there should be an alternative available where you refer to the subcomponent with its class name and not with the selector. If you do this, the selector is not necessary anymore, which means you don't have to import it into the component decorator's imports property anymore. You will have to import the class itself in TypeScript. That is necessary. But this change will first of all reduce a few lines of code. And what is maybe even more important to the Angular team is that they are bringing it one step closer to Vite, for example, to the new bundle tools, because they are all depending on single file compilation, which means as a bundler, I only want to look at one file and I want to see what kind of dependencies do I have? How does it look like? The problem is if we're using a selector and there is an app home here on the right side instead of the class name, then I, as a bundler, I can go, of course, I see then also the TypeScript file, but the TypeScript file doesn't tell me to which components of those who are imported, to which of these components is this app home selector actually applied. I, as a bundler, I have to open the other files like the app, like the home component or something else. I need to look up the selector there, and then I can tell what kind of TypeScript class or what type of component gets into that particular app home tag. And if I don't have to open another file, then I can only rely on a single file, which means I have more compatibility with the way how read works. At least that's the way how it has been told to me. We'll see. But again, this is something which I already mentioned before with Minko, that's that kind of closing the gap to Vite is also one of the main challenges or main targets, main goals, however you want to see it, of the Angular team. Manfred.
Yeah, so one thing that is obvious here is that when we can get rid of the selector, when we can get rid of the imports array, when we can get rid of the change detection strategy, because eventually perhaps it defaults to on push or to something else, especially when we think about signal components or a new authoring format, then not much is left up there in the component decorator. So perhaps we really get a situation eventually where we don't need to add metadata to the component decorator, or we don't need the component decorator at all. So this is also something I'm curious how all of this will evolve.
Yeah, and I think at NG Poland, it was already a little bit again teasered that that maybe selectorless and signal components might be merged together and might find their way into this new authoring format. So as I said, that we kind of can make a group collection of all the different complaints from all these kind of huge changes, let's put it like this, and address them at once, so to say.
This would make a lot of sense, and it's really nice to see how all those moving parts fit together at this point.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so as I said, Selectorless came quite, a lot of people showed interest into it, but then it just went down. So the Angular team said, this is something which is planned, just for you to know you can expect this for the future. But then, of course, the priority shifted a little bit towards other topics, but just keep an eye open. Maybe in 2026, it's going to be one of the bigger topics. Native observables, maybe we may just make this a little bit shorter. So native observables means that you don't have to install RxJS as a library anymore. You're getting the observable type with a subset of what we have in RxJS directly natively supported by your browser. The observable of the browser or of the standard, so to say, is not exactly as the one that we find in RxJS. There are certain simplifications, I would say. So I think it's a step into the right direction. What we are missing are all these pipe functions. They do have certain pipe functions, but they're implemented as methods of the observables. Again, if you're working with Angular for a longer time, then you might know that this was the way how it was in RxJS a few years ago, where the observable class itself provided a map, a filter method, but it was changed to pipe functions because class can't be tree shaken. But if it's part of the browser, if it's part of the native API, then of course tree shaking is not really an issue because the browser supports it out of the box. Yeah, this is what we have at the moment. They're still working on it, but in Chrome you can already use it.
So it seems like that RxJS, when this lands, becomes some library or the library for the pipe operators, because as you say, they are missing. And I think this is kind of beautiful. We get observables for free. And if we want the power of RxJS with all its pipe operators, we just add RxJS to the game.
Yeah, I mean, I looked it also up. What we could now do if we want to come up with our own pipe functions, we would have to wrap the functions in each other. So that's the way how we can do it. For example, you write your own map function, which does actually exist for the observable, but you can then call map, pass the observable into it. And if you want to apply another pipe function on top of the map, then you call that function, put the map with the observable into it. In the long run, I think that might be replaced because there is now, or actually for a very long time, there is now this proposal for JavaScript where they are also supporting, I'm not sure if it's called pipes, but where the piping itself becomes a real thing of the language, like it is, for example, in F#. And if that's the case, then I fully understand, of course, I don't have to use the functional pipes anymore, because I can write a function and then use the native pipe operator as well. So it kind of fits together. Good. AI in Angular, also a very big topic, which became, I would say, early summer. We heard more and more from the Angular team that they are actually working a lot towards AI. There are some challenges and some answers already. First of all, what we are hearing is maybe it's not the top priority, but it is definitely one of the major things that the Angular team is currently working on. Has also been confirmed in some Q&A sessions over the year that the Angular team really has to think about how, as a framework, what they can do so that they are kind of optimizing the framework for support or to work together with AI, to work together with LLMs. That's a huge topic at the moment in Angular. We also have an MCP server. So if you're using one of the latest version, 2021, please make use of it, because the MCP server will make sure that you're using the latest features of Angular and not those kind of features which the LLM has been trained with, which is very outdated code, so to say. We also have an AI tutor, and then we also have this web code gen scorer, which the Angular team has implemented just to evaluate how good different frameworks are in when LLMs are using them to kind of generate applications. And again, they're using these tools on their own in order to improve the framework as a whole. There was one Q&A session with someone from the Angular team, and he was also asked, when do single components arrive? And he said he has no idea, because at the moment, everything is in terms of AI. It has just flipped the complete roadmap. So he can't tell us or give us any new predictions or planned release dates, because AI is now that topic which they all kind of have to work on.
So actually, it's also a lot of fun and not that difficult to use those new tools. For instance, if you go with Cursor AI, just connect Cursor AI to the CLI's MCP server and you will get all this goodness. Then suddenly you will have a lot of information about Angular in your context. available. And yeah, this will then improve the code that is generated. So
Yeah.
it's not difficult, and it's a lot of fun. I would definitely try it out.
Yeah, especially if you say now, for example, NGNew, it's already asking you what kind of ID are you using, or should I just create an agentMD? So it's already making sure that the setup steps are at an absolute minimum and that it just works. Yeah, very interesting topic, which I think will also follow us in 2026 and the other years. Yeah, then we had the release of Angular 20. I don't think there's so much to say. It was like a stabilizer feature. So a lot of the API that Angular has provided went from developer preview into stable. Unfortunately, the resource in Angular 20 was still marked as experimental. It's still marked as experimental in 21, but I would say there weren't that many features with Angular 20 if you compare it with other releases before or maybe even after. Manfred, from your side, anything you want to add?
Well, one thing that I really liked in Angular 20. No, let's go on with the next.
Okay, good. Yeah, and this happened then during summer, where the Zoneless support was kind of switched over from experimental to developer preview. Don't ask me if this was already done in 20 or maybe in a minor release. But in the end, even in the 20 release, it switched from developer preview to stable, and it was also announced that in 21 already it's becoming the default. So what's the difference between stable and default? Well, stable means you can rely on it, just use it. And default means if you are doing NGNew in 21, you are getting Zoneless by default. So if you want to have Zone.js, you have to explicitly enable it, which only applies, of course, to NGNew. If you have an existing Angular application and you do an ng update, then of course you will stay at Zone.js if you had it before. The deprecation of Angular animations was also announced, as it was already hinted by Minko a little bit earlier. Again, the reason is that so many features are already provided natively by modern browsers, so there is no need anymore to do it in userland. And they also want to open it up to that so that we can use third-party animations library as well. We got the animate enter and the animate leave. And then there was something else announced, Prime NGX, maybe 1-2 sentences about it. There was a plan of Prime NG to being better supported, being better maintained, and that we're getting a second edition, which is called Prime NGX, which would support all the latest features of Angular. But this plan has already been dropped in the meantime. At the moment, we are only getting Prime NG. Prime NG will get the latest features of Angular, but there will be no Prime NGX. So this was some announcement which has then also changed over the year.
I think a lot of people are happy about Zoneless. I think Zoneless is not in the top 10 list, or Zone.js is not in the top 10 list of the most favorite Angular features. So I think a lot of people are really happy that Zoneless is now the default. It always was a bit magic. And we also talked about Angular animations before. I also think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Good. And then came the big features. So we had then, first of all, the first public demo also during summer of the Signal forms. There will be a talk after this one, so I keep it short. It's the unification of the forms. That's the form module you should go for in the future. It's of course based on signals. Of course, the validation is extremely powerful, and you're also getting an improved developer experience. But here I would say Manfred is then going to show what this actually means in detail.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and then the last thing, vtest was then also announced as the modern framework in Angular 21. It took some time. It was already foreseeable in a way. I I understood that if you read between the lines in this strategy Q&A session, which happened in spring with Minko, you could already hear that it looks a lot for V-test, because Minko was saying whatever they are going to use, they think that the successor of the Jasmine Karma combination needs to be a testing framework which can also run the tests in the browser. Again, because the browser is the native environment for our front-end applications. A lot of things are just there natively. You don't have to emulate them, or you have to kind of find workarounds it. And of course, it's also important for the migration scenario. So if we are having a lot of Jasmine Karma or Jest tests, maybe not just that much, but Jasmine Karma tests, if we say, well, it's the same environment which we are now moving over to, of course, the migration is also a lot of easier. At the same time, it was then also decided to deprecate the support for Jest. So there is an experimental mode for Jest available, which will be removed in one of the future versions of Angular, not in 21, but later. And it shows again that Angular wants to close really the gap to Vite. As the name says, V-test is actually built on top of Vite. And Angular says there are so many great tools outside in the JavaScript ecosystem. We want to make use of it. We don't want to be like an outsider, but we want to just be part of the cool group, so to say. And well, V-test is definitely something where I would say this was really important, that we are kind of using those tools which all the other front-end frameworks are also already using. And yeah, it's just great. As I said, for me, that's actually the highlight and not the signal forms of this year. And both things, V-test as a stable version was released in 21. So it's stable at the moment. If you start a new project, if you want to migrate, then the migrator experimental, but not V-test itself. And in 21, we then also, of course, also got the signal forms. And for me, that was it already. These were the highlights of this year. We have 2 weeks to go. I don't think that there is any new highlight this year. And I would say if you're interested in getting always an up-to-date on a weekly basis, here you have the different links, all the different platforms where Engine News is available. And Manfred, thanks for the opportunity to do here the first Engine News talk, actually.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for joining. This was really a nice retrospective of the year. So big thanks for all of this.
Thanks.
And of course, big thanks for all your work you're putting into it. I mean, I see it on a regular basis because we are working a lot together. You're really putting in a lot of effort into all of this, writing everything together, collecting information, doing the videos and so on. Sometimes you're working really late in the hotel room before a conference. So big thanks for all you do for the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so the next topic is about looking into the future. And for this, I will talk a bit more about this new feature, namely signal forms. Not that much into the future. And for this, I have a very, very tiny slide deck. It's really tiny because most of the stuff I'm showing here will be done via live coding. Okay, here we go. So what I will do via live coding today is implementing a signal form that contains more or less all the features signal forms provides. For instance, we have something, you see it here, like validators. We even have multi-field validators where this value and that value is compared. We have asynchronous validators. We have metadata, something that was not available before. So because of metadata, we know that we can display this information to the user so that they know what to enter. We have something like conditional validation. When we check delayed, the validation for the delay is different. If it is delayed, then the delay has to be 15 minutes or something more. delay itself will eventually become a custom control. We also talk about repeating groups, form arrays, and we talk about form groups. And here you see we can even do a validation across the entire form array. For instance, if we have the same key twice, 2 times a price for economy class, we are getting here an error message. So this is what I want to show you, all those advanced stuff. And for this, I've prepared a little tiny data model, a flight which has an aircraft and several prices. And using this, I will show you all those topics like using standard schema, like custom validators, showing validation errors, extracting schemas, conditional validations, multi-field validations, async validations, HTTP validations, nested forms, form group and arrays, custom controls, and metadata. And all of this will be done using live coding. Okay, so let's get started with live coding. And for this, let's switch over to my IDE. And here, let's start my project I've prepared. And here we see it's about searching flights. And when I click edit, I can edit the flight in question. Or not, because it's not implemented here, but this will be our task. Okay, so for this, let's switch into the source codes. There is a flight edit component somewhere. And in there, you see I have a store, a signal store. And this signal store gives us the flight at hand, the flight we want to provide via the edit mask. I'm normalizing this flight. This is mainly about formatting the date so that my control can nicely display the date, and all of this is done in computed. This gives me a signal of flight, the normalized flights with the normalized flight state. Okay, and now we can add a signal form. So let's call it flight form, and let's pass flight into this form helper. That comes from, you should see it somewhere above here, Angular forms signals. So I'm passing in here this dot flight, and in theory, this should already work. In practice, I'm getting those red squiggles here. Why do I get red squiggles? Well, let's have a look here. Because I have a signal of flight, but the form helper would expect a writable signal of flight. Obviously, when we create a form, we want to write back to our model. If the user is changing something, we want to write back to the data source, to our model, and that's why we need to have a writable form here. However, the store only gives us read-only data, and also when wrapping this data in computed, it's also, of course, read-only. And also this makes sense. So in order to bridge the gap, we can now switch out computed by a linked signal that is returning a writable signal. However, it's only writable in the sense that we can update a local working copy. So if we write it, the working copy inside of the linked signal is updated, but not the data source. It's not written back to the store, which would not be in the spirit of using stores that are supposed to encapsulate the data so that only the data can change in a well-defined way. Okay, cool. This here becomes my field tree of flight. And a field tree is something like, let's put it in simple words, like a nested signal. A nested signal that also has some form metadata. This signal is nested in a sense that we can data bind on each and every level. To demonstrate this, let's add a function to stuff. And now if we look into my flight form, we can data bind on the entire flight level. Here we get the value or all the other properties we know from Angular forms like dirty, disabled, why it's disabled, errors, hidden, and so on and so forth, touched, valid, and the value. So we can read it and data bind it at the entire level, at the entire model level, but we can also navigate down to from the airport of departure. And also here we can say, now give me the value or give me something else like, is it dirty, is it disabled, is it hidden, and so on and so forth. And we can even go deeper. So if you say, well, I want to go to my aircraft, then one more time, this game starts again. Then we can look at the registration number or at the type of the aircraft. And once again, we can read the typical values like the value, valid, touched, and so on. So every time, if you're wondering when you need this guy here, this parentheses, those full parentheses, you need it when you want to go inside of this signal. If you just want to navigate down, you don't have those parentheses. This would be a bit too much if you had a lot of parentheses before each and every dot. But if you want to go inside of it, and if you want to collect data, form data at this very level, then go with the full parentheses. Okay, cool. So now we can already use this guy here to data bind our flight model to our form. And for this, we need the directive field. And then we can go to the HTML. And here we can data bind field to flight form dot, what did we have, dot ID. And one more time, we are getting squiggles and flight form, form. One more time, we are getting squiggles. And this is because the Angular team is really going far with the type system here. They are really checking if the data type of ID is fitting my input here. And currently it's not fitting because the ID is a number and the typical input is binding a string. So somehow they are connecting the type system of TypeScript to the type system of HTML. So what we need here is type number, and then it fits together. Okay, cool. So let's do the same with from. Let's do the same with to. And let's do the same with the date. Awesome. So I guess that's it. Let's have a look here and hey, seems to work. Here we have our ID and we have from and we have to and we have our date. Okay, cool. Now, of course, the next question is, how can we validate our model? How can we validate our form? And for this, we can add here another parameter, which is a scheme. This scheme is technically nothing else but a lambda expression. A lambda expression that that gets a path. Let me double check if you see everything I'm showing. Hey, my cat is here. Just give me a second. Bye. Okay. Yeah, and you see everything I see. That's also good to know. So we can go on here. Here we have a scheme. And yeah, this scheme is a lambda expression that gets a path. So if we look at the data type of this path, here it's a schema path tree. Sometimes it's just a schema path. It depends a bit on the data type on the left side. But in general, when it comes to a path, you can think about this path as a laser pointer pointing at some position in your entire data model. As we have seen before, the data model is hierarchical. We have the entire flight form. It consists of a flight, which consists of an aircraft, which consists of a type and a registration number. With this path, you can point everywhere in this hierarchical structure. So for instance, we can point to from. And this is needed when we are spinning up here our validators, when we say from is required, or when we say, well, min length for from is 3. If you want to have a special error message for required, you can also put it here. This is required. It is one possibility of defining your very error message. There are also other possibilities for doing this. Okay, cool. So now let's switch back to our HTML. And there we could now, of course, display flight form from. Flight form from. We are going inside of the model, and there we are picking the errors. This would be one possibility. I will display it with the JSON pipe. So let's add the JSON pipe here. Second possibility, we do the same on the form level. Now we need the parentheses for the form. But as you might know, error messages are not aggregated to the form level. So the parent does not see the error messages of the children. But if you really want to have all the error messages, you could go with an error summary, which was newly added to signal forms. Then you also see the errors of your children. Okay, so let's try this out. Yeah, here we see grr is a bit too short. We see here min lengths, and the min lengths would have been 3. And we see the same on this more global form level. If you're wondering why here the name of the field is missing, well, it's not missing, it's there, but it's invisible because it cannot be serialized as JSON. It is an internal data structure that points to this or that field. But if you iterate those objects in source code, you will see there is an object in there that gives you some information about the field in question. Okay, so let's see if also the required works here. And you see, every time we get here an error message, we have kind required and some additional metadata. Some additional metadata that tells us what is going on. And this metadata might also consist of the error message we designed before. But you don't need it. Perhaps you have some component that is mapping the kind required or the kind min length to some nice error message. Okay. Now, of course, you are wondering, how can we implement our custom validators? And in order to implement a custom validator, you can go with validate. And one more time, you are passing in from. And then you are passing in a lambda expression. This lambda expression gets a context. The context is what we are talking about. In our case, we are talking about from. And here I could say, hey, context, give me the current value. Or I could say, I want to have the state of the current field. You know, the state is, no parentheses, the state is all those known properties, like is it dirty, are there errors, is it hidden, do we have a value, is it valid, is it touched, and so on. But it's even better than this, because the context also gives us access to siblings. We could say, well, give me the value of my neighbor of 2. And now I could compare the value of from and to. This makes it very easy to implement multi-field validators. Comparing from to do, comparing minimum to maximum, something like this. Okay, here in this case, I'm just grabbing the value. I have a signal allowed. And here I'm adding some cities, Graz, Hamburg, Zurich. And then in there, I can check, does allowed include my value? And if everything is fine, I can return null. You know, not complaining is praise enough. And otherwise, I'm returning an object. It should consist of a kind, not supported airport. And then I can add my very own metadata to describe the error. Like we tried it with this value, and only this would have been allowed. And that's it. So let's try it out. Let's go over there. Graz is in my allow list. Gra is not in the allow list. There I'm getting here this error message, not supported airport, with my metadata. Of course, usually you would map it with some helper component to a nice message you want to display to the user. So meanwhile, it's a bit packed in here. You should not be claustrophobic if you implement something like this, but you can help yourself by refactoring all of this. For instance, I could take this guy here and refactor it to a helper function, validate city. And of course, when it comes to validate city, I don't want to pass in the entire path, but just the city in question, which is, we see it here, a schema path of string. So let's go in there. Also here, path should be a schema path of string. And then we can get rid of .from because I'm already passing in my string that is now validated in there. And this is all you need to implement your very, very own validator. This is really straightforward, especially when compared to template-driven forms in the past, where you needed a directive that implemented an interface that had this special multi-provider. This was not a lot of fun. When I explained this to people, they always looked at me like I would eat little kittens, but now it's really straightforward. Of course, usually you put this to your shared folder, to some validation folder, and that's it. But we can also refactor this guy here to an own scheme path. So let's see if this works. Extract to constant. Let's call it flight schema. And then here we go. This is a path. And the path is here. Or I think I should create it with the schema function, schema of flight. And then the rest should come quite naturally. Yeah, and this here is now, one more time, a schema path tree of flight. And usually you don't have this locally here inside of your component. No, usually you move this to your data model, to where you describe the flight. I will do this a bit later when I switch to another scheme for the flight. By the way, in there, you can also call something like validate standard schema. And standard schema is a cool thing because standard schema is a general standard that is implemented by libraries like SOT. That means if you already have a flight scheme in SOT, you just can reuse this existing SOT schema, and that's it. So you will get automatically your base validation for required min lengths and so on. And chances are, if you are using Node.js in the backend, that you already have SOT and a SOT schema. And if you don't have a SOT schema, you can generate it quite easily nowadays out of a Swagger description of an OpenAPI document. So this makes default use cases really straightforward. Okay, so the next step is to bring more structure into this game. And for this, I want to introduce some subforms, a subform for the aircraft, for the prices, and for the flight header. For this, I've already prepared here those three components, and I'm switching to my HTML. I'm getting rid of all my fields, and instead, I'm just delegating to my prepared components. I think I deleted a bit too much. I need the form tag here. So let's delete those elements here. Let's stick with the form tag and Bob's your uncle. So now it's a bit more maintainable. I have my three sections inside of my form. So if we look over here, you see that something did not compile. Flight scheme in flight edit component, import declaration conflict. So let me double check. Line 27. Yeah, I already have my flight scheme. So let's get rid of it. And let's from now on use the already prepared one. And here you see we have now our three subforms. We have here our flight header, we have our prices, and we have here our subform with the aircraft. Okay, quite nice, I guess. If we look into one of those subforms, we see those subforms are just forms that have an input, and the input is a field tree of this or that sub-element, of price array, of aircraft, and so on. And this one more time emphasizes that a field tree is a hierarchical data structure. A field tree consists of field trees, and they in turn can consist of field trees. I'm just passing in a part of my field tree into my subcomponent here, the prices here, the aircraft here, the flight form itself. Okay, so let's switch over a bit to my flight scheme to explain some additional things. Namely, one thing I want to explain is conditional validation. You see it here, when the flight is not delayed, then my delay is disabled. And there is a reason printed out why it's disabled, because it's not delayed. And once I'm activating delayed, a different set of rules applies here. Suddenly, I can here update my delay. And I have here a minimum amount of 15 minutes. Because in the country where I live, everything below 15 minutes is completely in time, is perfectly in time. Being late starts with being late for 15 minutes or more. So minimum amount 15 minutes, 16 is fine, 15 is fine, 14 is not a delay at all here. And this is a nice example because it shows that depending on the current state of my model, I can have additional validation rules. So let's have a look into the scheme, how this here is implemented. For this, let's move over to my flight scheme. And in there, you see this disabled here. My delay property is disabled when this lambda expression returns something that is truthy. In the easiest case, it can be true or false. But if you want to provide a reason, like it's not delayed, then you can also return an string, like here. But in the simplest form, just return a Boolean where you say, well, it depends on the value of delayed. Delay is disabled when we are not delayed. And this should give us this behavior we've seen before. Disabled because, yeah, here we don't have any reason. But if we return a string, then we can access this information because not delayed should now displayed here. And if you're wondering how you can get hold of this reason, well, if you look into your component, there you see that each and every field like delay has this property disabled reasons, which is an array. You can iterate over it, and then you can use the message in there. The message of the first reason, the message of the second reason, the message of the third reason. Okay, cool. So besides disabled, we also have something like read-only. For read-only, there is no reason. Or hidden, if you want to hide it. Delay is hidden, yeah, when we are not delayed. By the way, hiding the field is your task. If it is hidden, you only see that the property hidden returns true, but then it's your task to hide it, because quite often you not only want to hide the field itself, but also the label. So only you as the programmer knows what to hide when it's marked as hidden. What do we have else? Well, here we have apply when or apply when value. This says that our path gets some additional validation rules when this here is true, when the flight is delayed. And those validation rules can be found here in this second scheme, delayed flight, which is just a scheme for a flight that says, well, now it's required and the minimum delay is 15 minutes for the discussed reasons. Although this is quite a nice feature. Here in my example, I have some further validators that do some asynchronous validation. There is even a special async validator that is asking the backend. So basically, we are just calling here an URL. We are sending up our value, and then we are mapping the result of this API call to an error message or to null. Of course, it's null when nothing bad happens. Here I have an example for some round-trip validators. In this case, we are sitting on top of the entire path, which is our flight, and so we can look down to from and to make sure that from and to have different properties. You find those examples here. I don't want you to bore too much in the linked blog article. But for now, I want to proceed with something that is a bit more exciting, namely subforms and form groups and form arrays. So you might remember that my flight has an aircraft. And in order to say, well, let's also validate this aircraft in the flight, we can say apply. And here we can say path.aircraft. And for this, please take the aircraft scheme, which is just another schema that says registration is required and the type is required. And we can do the same for the price scheme. However, one flight has several prices, so it's an array. That's why we need apply each. Path, prices, and for each price, we will now apply the price schema. Another schema that makes sure we have a flight class and we have an amount that is 0 or more. We can now even write a validator that is validating our entire array. Also here you find the source code in the linked example. I don't want you to bore with all those validators, but this is completely possible. And all we need for this now is just a loop that goes through the prices and that makes sure there are no duplicate prices. So let's double check this. Here the aircraft has the validators, type and registration number is required. And when it comes to the prices, I'm not allowed to have the same flight class 2 times, then I get this validator kicked in that lives on the level of the array. So this is also pretty straightforward. $300, $400, and $500. So if we look into our price component one more time, we see rendering this price component is just a matter of rendering the array we have in our form model and displaying a field or a bunch of fields per entry. So working with form arrays was never that easy. Okay, I have 2 additional features I really want to show you. One additional feature is metadata. You see here, we are telling the user that they are supposed to enter something, so it's a required field, something with 3 to 30 characters, and something that is a city. And this information can be read from our form model. We can add metadata, and also the validators can add metadata. Because if we add the required validator, it's kind of natural that this is a required field. If we add min lengths and max lengths, it's kind of natural that there is a lower and an upper bound. So let's see how we can get information about metadata. For this, I'm switching to my flight component, and in there, for from and to, for instance, I'm calling my helper component field metadata, and it gets the current tree of my element I want to data bind. So in there, in field metadata, you see I'm getting my field tree. It's here delivered via an input. And then I need to unwrap this field tree. This is a bit a pity, because now I need full parentheses. Looks a bit like my swollen eyes when I wake up on Monday morning. But we really need it, because first of all, we have a signal because of the signal-based input. And then we have a signal because the field tree itself is a signal. So I'm unwrapping it here. I'm putting it to my field state. And then I can ask this field state about the usual stuff. So let's repeat the usual stuff. I could ask it, hey, my friend, is the field dirty? Do we have errors? Is it invalid? What's the value? Is it valid? And so on. So I could ask the typical questions, but now in signal forms, I can also ask about metadata. And for this, I just pass in a metadata key. Angular itself comes with several metadata keys. Each and every built-in validator has at least one metadata key, like required, or min length, or max length. Of course, there does not need to be metadata for required min length, max length. That's why I need the safe access operator. That's why I always have a default value here. But basically, I'm just reading this metadata that was placed in there by the validators, and then I have all my data here, and I can display it to the user in the mentioned way. Strings, lower bound, upper bound, and so on. When it comes to city, I had, of course, to define my own metadata key. And this can be done now in the newest version of Angular with create metadata key. And then here I'm passing in the data type. If I go with a simple metadata key like this here, then my metadata might be overwritten. Let's say I have 2 validators, validator 1 and validator 2. And validator 1 is saying, well, city true. And validator 2 is saying, no, city false. In this case, they are overriding each other, so the last one wins. This is the behavior of a simple metadata key. And that's why we have those aggregated keys, where you can define a reducer for how those values are combined. There are some default reducers, but you can also implement your own reducers. This default OR reducer is ORing the booleans. So if it is true or false, it will be true, of course. And so it tells us that this here is a city. We can also AND it. In this case, everyone needs to say it's a city. We can say .list, then we get a list with all the values. Then we can do a majority quorum, something like this. But I think in this case, OR is good enough. Okay, so just take the keys, pass the keys to the metadata function, and you get back your metadata value or undefined. And now the big question is, how can we then define the metadata? Well, we can do it directly inside of the scheme. Here we could say metadata path from city true. I think it's a lambda expression, yeah. So we can do it directly in there, but most of the times you don't do it directly because the called validators already know what's going on here. And so you can move this line of code into one of your validators, like validate city async. You have it, for instance, here in the beginning. Okie doke. One last feature. So far, delayed was just an input box, a text field. But now let's switch it out by a custom control. For this, let's move to flight component. And here I will remove my delay input field and replace it by a self-made delay stepper that allows me to step forward in steps of 15 minutes with the delay. I'm using the traditional field directive to data bind my delay. That also means that I have here all the state of this field, like is it valid, is it pristine, is it dirty, is it disabled, what are the reasons for disabling it, and so on. To implement something like this in the past, we needed a control value accessor. And also the control value accessor was for sure not the most beloved element in Angular. I'm quite sure if you make a short list, the 20 most famous elements in Angular, the control value accessor is not a part of it. Now, when it comes to signal forms, it's really easy. All we need to add is a value property that is a so-called model signal. We set it up with the model function. And that's it. And if we want to know whether this element is disabled or not, we are setting up an input signal that is called disabled. Just as easy as that. And now we get the value, we can update the value, we get the information whether this field here, the represented field, is disabled. Of course, those are not magic field names. They are in here in the form value control. Here you see there is a value, and you see if we go more upwards, there is an errors input signal that is optional, disabled is optional, disabled reason, and so on and so forth. So we get a lot of optional stuff here. The only thing that is mandatory is the value. And this is now a nice feature for implementing your very own reusable components. When it's disabled, it's currently displaying no delay. And when it's not disabled, then I can count upwards in steps of 15 minutes. very simple custom control, but yeah, complex enough to show this amazing new feature of signal forms. Okay, cool. Perhaps one really last feature. Perhaps you're remembering in the traditional form APIs, we had a way to format our fields just by defining some special named classes, CSS classes. At first sight, this is gone in signal forms, but at second sight, there is a better replacement feature for this. Namely, when you bootstrap your application, you can now provide a signal forms config. And now you can say, every time a field is valid, assign this CSS class. And every time a field is invalid, assign that class. And every time it's pending, assign another class. In the past, those class names were magic names, ng-valid, ng-invalid, and so on. Now it's up to you how you want to call it. I think I've also prepared some formats for those classes. And yeah, seems to work. If everything is fine, we get a green border, a green left border. If there is an error, we get a red border. So it's a nice quick win, I guess. Okay, so this was my presentation about all, or at least most features in the space of signal forms. I've already uploaded my material, my examples to my blog here. You find it here. And also in my blog, you find a large write-up with all the features, also with all the code examples I skipped because I didn't want to bore you with showing you 50 different validator implementations. You'll find all of this here in the examples on my blog. And that's it. So let's double check if there are any questions. No questions so far, I guess. So last chance, if you have any question, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, I guess I call it a night. Rainer, do you have a question?
You asked me too fast. Let me think.
This was unexpected.
I was not aware of the metadata first. This was
it's a nicely hidden feature. Yeah, people don't talk much about it.
Yes, and I think maybe one of the next few features which will come up is maybe this compatibility mode where we can combine form groups, form controls. That might be also something interesting we could look forward to.
Yeah, important part. So perhaps I should also show it. So this is now my last thing I want to show. I think in there I already have a section. So just to show it briefly, really hope I have it in there. I'm not, yeah. So what I have here is a good old form group address. And here I have a signal with a passenger. And look there, you also have here a field address. And this address is pointing to my form control, to my form group. And if you have something like this nested data model, the new world and the old world, you can switch out form by combat form. And then you get the best of both worlds. Then you can data bind both sides, but everything is just one form model and the state is propagated upwards. So if this here becomes dirty, also this form model, or to be more precise, the entire combat form becomes dirty. So yeah, it is really a cool feature. Thanks for reminding me to this.
Yeah, sure. I think this is one of the upcoming questions. If people want to use it, like, what's the migration path? Do I have just to rewrite everything, or is there something that they are providing?
Totally. And it shows one more time the Angular team got us covered. We can combine the old and the new.
Yeah.
Has quite a tradition, meanwhile, if you think about standalone components or the updated APIs or now signal forms.
Yes, yes. Michael was just referring to the PR, which contains already the documentation. And I think they said that we can't really expect a migrator in that sense from reactive to signal forms as it was with the templates of the control flow, because it's not that easy. But they're looking into ways on how they can elevate or use AI to do that. So that is a new interesting field as well.
Totally, yeah. I guess AI is quite good at this kind of mechanical things that cannot really be automated.
Yeah. Especially if they provide the proper context. So if the prompt is or contains already all the information that the LLM needs, could work.
Awesome. Okay, I see there are no further questions. So one more time, Rainer, thanks for joining us today. It was really great to have you here.
Yeah,
and I
thanks for
would
the
love to
opportunity.
repeat this because it is some kind of different presentation. You know, it was a bit more interactive. So
Yes.
I really like those alternative formats. And also thanks to all of you at home at the screen. And yeah, see you in 2026.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.